Welcome to Season 5 of the Big Sci-Fi Podcast with Adina, Brian, Chris, and Steve, the biggest sci-fi podcast in the galaxy. The adventure is just beginning here at the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, and we invite you to come aboard the Starship Tangent. We know you'll enjoy the conversation, the laughter, the banter back and forth, and most of all, friends who love hanging out to talk about all things science fiction. Set your phasers to fun. Here we go.
Dreamers, that's what drives science fiction. Good day from the Big Sci-Fi Podcast. Before we begin today's podcast, as always, we thank you, the listeners, for this and our many, many other podcasts, all available to you in living color on NBC. I mean, on the Trek Geeks website, where this and other sci-fi podcasts are available. In addition, we're available on many of your favorite listening platforms. Our Facebook page is open to you to enjoy, to post, and follow our podcasts, including our YouTube videos as well. So if you'd like, you can go to our email address, thebigsci-fi-podcast@gmail.com, to send us your thoughts and comments. So many ways to enjoy the Big Sci-Fi Podcast. And now, back to the show. Dreamers. We are so appreciative of them, for they create the unreal universe that is science fiction. So dreamers like our own Adina, author of the Robot Galaxy book. Say hi, Adina.
Hi, Adina.
Hey, I get that joke.
Our Brian, who also is a published author and the man of many, who has helmed or is the helm of the USS The Big Sci-Fi Podcast. Say hello, Brian.
Hey, it's Brian from Ohio. Hey, everybody.
And Chris, who's going to film school so he can make his dreams come true alive on the big or little screen. Say hello, Chris.
Hey, everyone. It's Chris from Toronto, as we say.
Yeah. And there is little old, and I mean old me. I love to enjoy the fruits of the accomplishments of the dreamers. Today's guest is Jeffrey Morris, a dreamer that is making his dreams a reality. He is a writer, director, and founder of his own business, Future Dude Entertainment. I like that name, and it has no relationship to the Future Man from Enterprise, correct?
Correct.
We are here to talk to Jeffrey about his projects, what got him into sci-fi, and what he hopes for the future of his business and sci-fi in general. So, good afternoon. Thank you for being on the show, Jeff.
Hey, thanks a lot, you guys. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. I guess the first question I can ask for you is a very simple one, which is, when did you first see a sci-fi film or TV show that you can remember, how it affected you, and what got you to this point?
You know, it's funny. The very, very first sci-fi show I can remember watching was Jerry Anderson's UFO with my father.
Okay.
I was about 4 years old. And, I remember, I was a pretty different little kid. I was very interested in, I think it was about 2.5, not even 3, when I started, became aware of the Apollo missions or something.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was really, really into it. I thought it was really interesting that people were going to the moon, and the moon was this thing up in the sky, right? But the idea that there were people there, I was able to somehow cognate that concept, and it was really interesting to me. So when I saw this show that took place in the future and it had people on the moon and it showed those sorts of things, I thought that was pretty interesting. I obviously didn't understand what was going on in the show, a lot of it, but I thought it was really fascinating, the cars and the vehicles and all those sorts of elements and everything. So that's the very, very first sci-fi thing I can remember, followed by Lost in Space, seeing that, sort of in reruns in the afternoons. And I do remember struggling with it. I remember liking the first couple of episodes, but then thinking, even as a small child, it got kind of silly to me and everything. I wanted something to be more real and everything. So, but those are kind of my first 2 early childhood memories of science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you said you were around 3 or so, when the Apollo, was that the Apollo 11 mission or later mission?
No, so I was born in 67, right at the end of 67. So my it was really like around Apollo 14 that I became aware of it. 14,
Okay.
15, 16, and I really, by the time they had the lunar rover, and all this stuff, that was when it got cool. It's like they've got a car up there, it was pretty, yeah.
Brought to you by General Motors, who helped build it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about you got anybody else who was around at that time, but I was a little obsessed with getting my hands on Tang, and, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
drink with the astronaut's drink. That's right.
Drink with the astronaut's drink. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So. I'm going to say this as a compliment. Darn, you sure don't look it. I mean, I was there. I was there. I watched the Apollo 11 mission live on television, all 20, from start to finish. And I saw
you're
that.
A few years older than any of us,
Just a few. But again, it was exciting to see the Apollo missions happen. And yeah, you're right. To realize that people landed on the moon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we were watching it on television.
Right.
It wasn't fabricated in a unless some people do believe fabricated in a soundstage, right. But this was real. I mean, you were seeing images from people hopping around on the surface of the moon. So I can see how that impressed you as a young child.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was my father was actually an aerospace engineer, and he we'd actually wake up, sometimes the transmissions would come late at night. And so I'd go to bed early and he'd wake me up, and I'd be in the middle of the night sitting on the floor, watching these astronauts bounce around. So that was some cool stuff. So anyway, I think that I immediately from early childhood sort of connected what I would see as far as science fiction with what was going on with real space exploration. So for me, it was always about dreaming about projecting it forward. That was a big deal for me. So, seeing movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, a huge deal for me as a child. I didn't see it until it was on NBC. It was on television, obviously. But it felt like this tour of a future that I was going to grow up to live in, and that was really, really, really amazing stuff. So yeah.
It's as you think of it, you go, you were expecting. Now, of course, where we are right now, you go, wait a minute. We didn't make it to 2001. We didn't go to Jupiter. We didn't. We didn't. What the heck? I remember watching the Jets.
Don't get me started. It's like I literally was talking to somebody just in the last couple of days about the idea of like, what if I were to have asked myself back in 1975, like what I thought the world of 2023 was going to be like, and we're off the mark by a little bit. So yeah. So.
But we have come a long way technology-wise. I mean, really.
That's true. That's true. I would say personally, I would trade it. I'd rather have, city block size computers and have a spacefaring civilization that, has solved all kinds of problems. I think I'd rather live in that world and not have smartphones.
Yes.
What I mean? If I had to trade it, I think that'd be the trade-off. And so, but let's get further into, we'll start talking about some of these other things that were influences, and we can. Yeah.
So just tell us a little bit about your books, your films, what influenced you, what did those which ones particularly? Well, you mentioned about some films that influenced you. Any specific books or novels that you read that really got you?
Absolutely. I was a big, obviously I loved Arthur C. Clarke books. Larry Niven, huge Larry Niven fan. Love his known universe stuff. Also was a big fan of Ben Bova. A lot of his books, he had awesome books and everything. As a matter of fact, I was actually developing a novel with him at one point. Unfortunately, he passed away, but it was we were working on a project. It was really cool. But it was really an honor to get to meet him because he was a huge hero of mine and everything, which is cool. So, but yeah, those are probably my three favorites in terms of authors that I really got into. When I was growing up, definitely those three.
Can I ask you, can we go back a little ways, just like, because we're talking about inspiration, was there a moment or a season in your life when you remember, like, I think I want to be a filmmaker, I think I want to be an author, I want to kind of dive into this world? What kind of lit your fire to actually say, I'm gonna pursue this?
the funny thing is that, okay, so going back to that early childhood thing, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Okay, cool.
And I really, really was charging forward, and that was going to be my dream. I was going to be an astronaut. And it was really interesting because obviously culturally, once we beat the Soviets, a lot of public interest, it kind of waned for space exploration and going to the moon, and certainly at the scale at which we were doing it, right? And if you look at a lot of the books and the art and stuff, NASA had plans, projections for missions, and they were hoping to be on Mars by the 1980s. Huh. Let alone, I mean, way beyond that, obviously space colonies, the Gerard K. O'Neill stuff, and all these cool things that they had planned. And it was really interesting because as a kid, I would be talking to my friends, and there was always this sort of reticence in a lot of them. They didn't understand why I liked it so much. It was very interesting, right? And I think that at the time they were sort of picking up on the vibe of the culture. There was sort of a lack of interest. And then Star Wars came along, and I saw what little interest they might have had in space shift to that. Suddenly Star Wars became future. The future became space. It became that. But I remember when I first saw Star Wars when I was a kid, I was super excited for it. I remember seeing the commercials and everything. I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. What is this? And everything. But of course, I was trying to relate it to our reality, right? So I was like, where is that? When is that? How does this work, right? So then when I'm sitting in the movie theater and the very first words on the screen are "a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away," I was probably like a little dog. I was like, it was like, it was like, what am I? Wait, what? Yeah. And so these are humans, but they're in another. Wait, what? So, but eventually I just went with it, and it's like, okay, this is cool. This is cool. But I watched my friends, as I was saying, they got into the action figures, they got into the story, they got into stuff. For me, I was like, well, how did they do that? That was my thing, right? I was like, how did they make Tatooine? How did they make the Death Star? How did they make those super cool spaceships? Because they look different than any other than 2001, right? There was nothing else that looked as good as that, right? I was like, how did they do it? So I started getting books, and I got The Art of Star Wars and started trying to devour anything I could get that was about the making of that film and films like it. And when I was about 12 years old, I decided, I want to grow up I want to use the technology of Star Wars to make science fiction movies, but hard sci-fi stuff. Like, so instead of a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I want to do in the near future in our solar system. Those are the stories I want to tell, right?
What's really interesting about that is, especially since you said your father was an aerospace engineer, and that so the path that you took was more, how do we do that in film and make different film, as opposed to, I mean, did your dad try to encourage you to go into engineering?
Oh, no question.
Did you have those thoughts of how do I make things in real life?
Yeah, if we fast forward to me being a senior in high school, when I decided to go to film school, my parents were horrified because because in their minds, they really wanted me to go into engineering, or I dabbled with the thought of becoming an architect, for example. That was one of the things I thought about. So, so I was an illustrator. I knew how to draw. I knew how to do, I took drafting courses, all these things. Right. So and I was pretty good at it. And my parents were like, why are you throwing away a potential career where you could make good money, do this stuff, to go off into some lofty nonsense film thing? They didn't get it. They did not get it at all.
I know a guy that was interested in trying to do that with music once. So,
Yeah.
Well, and I ask that because you might not know this, but our audience who've listened to us before do. I am in aerospace, and so I'm also like, you and I mean, I'm a couple years younger than you, not much, but a couple. But I had the same thing, is like, I'm watching what's on the screen, and it's motivating me. But for me, it's motivating me. How do we do this in real life? So I went into actually engineering and science.
So my way of getting to how do we do this in real life was figuring out how to. If you go back and you look at something like the original Star Trek, there, in my background, I've worked with like NASA, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, for a while, and one of the things that I constantly ran into scientists, engineers, physicists, people, and they would talk about the impetus for them going into this was watching Star Trek when they were a kid. Right.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
100%.
They're right. So there's all these different, obviously science fiction motivates science reality. There's no question, right?
100%, 100%. Yes.
So I think that what happened for me was I saw a more direct line in, like, I kept thinking, okay, do I go become an engineer? Because I realized being an astronaut, I have to be honest, it seemed like a dead end. Like I was like, and nothing against the space shuttle and all those missions and all those people who went up there in the International Space Station, but it's nothing compared to what the dream was of being on Mars and having these space colonies and having a spacefaring civilization by now, right? And what I thought was, I want to go down the path of telling those kind of stories and make exciting action adventure stories that get people fired up about the realities in our possible future. And so to answer your question, Brian, that's what did it for me.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Chris, do you have any questions for Jeff at this moment?
I'm just so curious about, I guess, your first film and that experience of what that's like, because I, recently started film school, and a lot of my interest comes from just watching Star Trek, listening to the audio commentaries, and being like, "Ooh, how do they do that? How do they achieve this thing?" So I'll have more questions when we get there, I think.
Sure, absolutely.
So why don't you, even though it's coming to an end, your Kickstarter program, tell us a little bit about that, what you wish to achieve from it, and about your book,
and what the project is.
I think going kind of to draw a through line from where I was, talking back when I was like early teens to now. I've always been an avid science enthusiast, always, and I've always studied science my entire life. It's always been important to me. I probably my greatest hero is Carl Sagan. I saw his TV series Cosmos. I was aware of him before that, but when I saw Cosmos in 1980, to me, that's like the trajectory humanity should be on. It's like, using reason and our intellect to explore the universe and try to come to an understanding of it and figure out what our place is in it and the beauty and majesty of it, right? That's what I feel like we should be here to do, and so when I saw that was incredibly motivating for me. And I, over the years, I've tried to develop these hard science fiction stories. And one of them, one of my more recent stories is called Persephone, and it's about an adventure to the nearest star. So going way back, I always thought Alpha Centauri, was in Lost in Space. It was a destination in Lost in Space, right?
Right.
It was something that it's the nearest star system. So it was like, wow, so that's 4.3 light years away. That's still 150,000 years with our current propulsion systems, but hey, we might be able to figure it out, right? And it was like, I want to tell a story about going to Alpha Centauri, especially in 2016 when we discovered that there was a planet orbiting in the Goldilocks zone. If you guys are familiar with what that term means.
Absolutely.
Okay, yep. So in the Goldilocks zone of Proxima Centauri, which is the actual nearest star. So Alpha Centauri's system's got 3 stars in it. 2 of them are kind of sun-like, and then there's a third red dwarf, which is Proxima. And Proxima b orbits that. And it's a planet that they've determined is rocky and a little larger than the Earth, and it potentially has an atmosphere. And I'm like, this is fascinating. The nearest star, right? So that prompted me to want to tell a story about the how and why we would go there. But most importantly, what if, even though we've sent probes in advance, we have this advanced colony that's being set up robotically. Then you've got the colonists showing up later, decades later, and they get there and now their colony's in jeopardy and it's not working right. And they don't understand. And they go down to the surface in an emergency mission before the colony ship arrives. And they discover there's something there that they didn't know was there. And then the question starts to become, are we the invaders? Are we the problem? And the other thing I wanted to do was sort of deal with the dilemma of if you were born on board that ship. So you've got these young people who were born on the way. I thought that would be fascinating. And then you pair them with somebody who was in hibernation, who is awakened for this emergency, and now this person, after 50 years in suspended animation, is awake, and now they're with these young people who were born on board this ship. totally different perspectives as they're thrown into this circumstance. Can you imagine?
I love it. Yeah.
You know, so that's the impetus for Persephone. That's what the story's all about, you know. So
is I'm sorry, is this a beginning, middle, and end story, or is it the end is just the next step towards another story?
Well, it's interesting. It's funny. I've started developing the story in 2017. And it's been through a lot of different iterations. I mean, I was partnering with some large companies that have since changed hands, and it fell apart. And I've had big actors like Michael Caine attached to it, and other people. Like it's gone up and down. COVID killed it. Things happen, you know. So I've rewritten it. But earlier this year, I hit a draft of it that I really, really like. And one of the things that I did, Steve, was I jettisoned all the stuff that was the sequel stuff, the sequel setup stuff.
Okay.
Because I realized that it didn't matter. Like I was like, I need to tell the best story I can right now with the story in front of me, instead of sitting here trying to lay all these breadcrumbs to what could be episode 2 and 3 of this thing. Right now, I have written a sequel to it. And I like the story a lot. It's a very, very different story. It's very political, and it has a really surprising angle to it. But the first story at its current, it could stand on its own 100%. And I would say that it's my 2001. My goal is that this is the 2001 of the 21st century. That's
that's amazing.
So far for the 21st century. Yeah.
Dean, I think you had something to share.
Well, I did. That whole concept of you have a generation of people living on board a ship, and they have to interact with these other folks. One of the things, I guess one of my hobbies is I am very interested in linguistics and how language changes. I follow this guy. His name is John McWhorter. He's kind of like,
I love John McWhorter.
Yeah, he's like the Neil deGrasse Tyson of linguistics.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah.
Yes. So like I'm thinking, you got me thinking, like, so if you have this new generation of people, can they even effectively communicate with the folks who've been in hibernation? Because after they might have now have their own speaking style not
okay. They had parents who were from Earth, obviously.
So there's a bridge.
Yeah. And not only there's a bridge, but they also have a computer system on board the ship and AI that I call Omni. And Omni is very much about teaching them and keeping them. So I would say that they do have some slang, and they do have things that they say amongst themselves that kind of originated on the ship. Absolutely. Right. But, at the end of the day, it's like that idea feels like a novel, something that I put in the novel in a way, and as we go, right. Because it's because at the end of like, I've got 2 hours. And in this 2 hours, I really want to detail, you get to see about 3 days of these people's lives, 3 to 4 days of their lives. And in that span, it's a very serious situation where 10,000 lives are at stake. And they literally, don't know if they should move forward with their colony. That's what this whole situation ends up being. So. Yeah.
So when you have an expansive, like a potentially very expansive, detailed situation happening for you, why or what defines a difference that you're going to choose to make something into a film versus into more of a series or TV show? How do you draw the distinction there?
One, I mean, obviously there's the cost factor. I mean, the thing that I've spent 85% of my time doing in the last 30 years of my life is raising money and maintaining a business, so there's an economic aspect to this. And there's all of the, the whole, like, I've been pitching movies like The Martian to Hollywood since the 90s. Okay. And as a matter of fact, the very first screenplay that I ever really solidly wrote with my writing partner, Frederick Haugen, and I, we wrote this story called Utopia. It was about the first colony on Mars, and Ridley Scott optioned it. So Ridley Scott was going to make it, but he was going to make it a TV show. And through the mechanizations of Hollywood, the deal fell apart, and his company fell apart, and our deal went down the tubes with it. But I got that close to my first big script.
That's awesome.
told me I was on the right path. So Ridley Scott, it was funny. So when he did The Martian, I was like, man, it's like, obviously it's something that he's been thinking about for a while.
That could have been me.
Yes. So, but when I would pitch this stuff in Hollywood, the response I'd always get was, well, where are the guns? And I'm like,
yeah.
are there guns on the lunar module? I mean, it's like they didn't go up there with laser cannons on it, you know.
They're hoping for Armageddon with a Gatling gun.
I was about to say that. You beat me to it.
Yeah. No, there's absolutely. There's this thing of like, well, okay, they're on Mars. Like, does something try to eat them? I'm like, no, there's nothing up there that's going to try to eat them that we know of. I mean, it's like the environment itself is constantly trying to kill them. And we can tell a heck of a story around that. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that you don't need monsters and aliens in space out to get you. Space itself is an environment we are not evolved to exist in, you know, and so that's a challenge in and of itself. So for me, I've wanted to tell these stories. Like, it's just the same thing as going to Antarctica, right? Or, you know, what it was like for the first people who crossed the oceans, the challenges that they had. That's the exact same situation that I see, you know, these stories could be about. That's the kind of stories I want to tell. So not only in space, but I've also got another project about an underwater city that deals with similar kind of circumstances. So, you know, for me, it's about, you know, finding ways to tell these sort of realistic action adventure stories that have peril and drama, but they don't have these sort of typical sci-fi tropes that we see. You know, right? And because for me personally, I just have to be honest, I'm tired of them. It's like when I watch, you know, for example, I watched this Ahsoka thing, the Star Wars.
Actually, I like Ahsoka.
You know, every single space battle they'd have in there, I would just be like, okay. Like, I didn't feel anything. I knew they'd make it. I knew it would be fine. I knew it wasn't any big deal. Oh, we're gonna have a lightsaber fight. Oh, okay. You know what I mean? It just, and I don't mean to be negative. Right. It's just that it's gotten to a place where these tropes are so overdone. They're so recycled at this point. And I just feel like we need to lean into, you had a question, Steve, earlier. You said something about, you know, what do I want to see science fiction become in the future? I actually wanted to see it become science fiction. I actually want to see it become actual science fiction, as opposed to, you know, fantasy sort of wrapped with these technological trappings, right? There's you know, Star Wars is space fantasy, and even you know,
agreed.
It's a space fantasy, and I think that people call it sci-fi or science fiction because they've got robots in it. You know, they've got the droids, or they've got these ships that look like but those ships wouldn't really fly. They really wouldn't. None of them. You know, and it's
thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be anti-Star Wars. I mean,
you're right.
But you can love it, or we can love it. But it's also not fit the definition, you know, that those are right. Just because we don't think just because it doesn't necessarily fit the traditional or what, you know, hard science fiction definition doesn't mean we don't like it. It just means
exactly
the labeling issue.
Like The Empire Strikes Back is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love that movie. I think it's awesome. But I guess the point is that it's still a fantasy, right? And even, you know, it's funny because like I'm a big I'm a Star Trek guy, kind of original series through Deep Space Nine. That's kind of my Star Trek. And, I very much liked Next Generation. I think that Next Generation is about as good as television ever got in the genre. I really do.
You won't have any arguments here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, incredibly intelligent.
You're talking to the choir.
Yeah. Great. That's awesome. And it's brilliant, and it's really well done. And one of the things that I will give them is, they have a lot of made up kind of gobbledygook physics, but they stick within the guardrails of their made up physics. And that's super cool. That's one of the things that I like about it.
Consistency. Yeah.
There's a consistency and a sort of playbook, and they stick to it for the most part, you know? And I think that's really, really cool. So I'm kind of off on a diatribe here, but you guys get it.
That's quite all right. We love it. We love it.
We love a good diatribe.
Tangents, whatever. We love it. No, I will say this to you, Jeffrey, that I've always said, Star Trek is science fiction that can become fact. And we've seen it.
There's certainly elements of it. I think that, you know, when you look at things like this, what Alcubierre drive, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but this Mexican physicist who came up with equations that might be able to create a warp bubble, for example, right? That's really fascinating stuff. There have been experiments in the last 18 months or so where it looks like some of these things might be possible. The problem is generating enough energy. I'm sure you know all about this stuff, but, you know, generating enough energy to create these things and make it happen. But the point is, there's seeds of something there that could actually become something. That's what I like about Star Trek. That's what I, at least, you know, old Star Trek. You're right. The problem I have, the reason why I'm reticent about Star Trek kind of since 2009 is I feel like it's become Star Warsy. And I feel like it's become I call it Star Wars damaged. It's got a lot of like they hit it with Star Wars, and it just doesn't feel like what Star Trek was for me, and everything. So, and that part of that is that science and is those guardrails and is that, that stuff, so.
But remember that Star Trek originally what came about because they wanted to tell stories of the human condition.
Absolutely.
In a way that was easy to deliver, and let's deliver it as science fiction. Yes. Wrapped around morality stories and so on.
Yes, but even original series had folks like Asimov, on and off consulting writers with them too.
Yeah, they had
that too.
Yeah, they had real science fiction writers who were involved and engaged with it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And Steve, I couldn't agree more that that Star Trek, I was lucky to actually my underwater project, Dorothy Fontana, before she passed away, we were working together a little bit on it.
Oh my goodness.
And I got to hang out with her and spend some time with her, which was wonderful. Awesome. Several times we got together and spent time together. And she was absolutely one of my heroes. And, she told me a lot about working with Gene. And it was really interesting because, one of those things is just, this idea that he actually didn't really start out wanting to do a science fiction show at all. He wanted to talk about the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And so, and you're right. He wrapped it in this 23rd century cloth in order to make it palatable and get it past the network, and so I think that's really fascinating.
And it worked.
And it worked.
It sure did. Thank goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny when I said the thing is I don't want to make it sound like I am looking to Star Trek for science. The thing I like about it the most was the fact that it actually did have those morality plays and it did have the cultural critiques. Mm-hmm. And the ability to sort of open your eyes to different ideas that perhaps you hadn't thought about, right? And I think the difference between the old Star Trek stuff and the new Star Trek stuff is that I think the old Star Trek was much more. They brought you an idea and you had to figure it out, as opposed to they have an idea now and they take it in. They're like, it's like,
Hey. Yeah. Consider I grew up, watching Time Tunnel and mm-hmm. Lost in Space and Voyage Beyond the Sea and all that mm-hmm. Irwin Allen Monster of the Week stuff. And then Star Trek appeared and it was like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This is intelligent. And that's the same way we can transition into another subject, Mr. Jerry Anderson mm-hmm. and what he brought to science fiction and to television mm-hmm. and your involvement in your own project. With regards to Space 1999, The Eagle Has Landed, which, I do, as I jokingly wrote, copyright Neil Armstrong 1969. He coined that phrase.
Well, and part of the reason why I use the term The Eagle, why I named this documentary The Eagle Has Landed is because I feel that so let's go back to why am I doing a documentary? So I'm doing a documentary that specifically focuses on a spaceship. So there's a ship called the Eagle, mm-hmm. which was the primary mode of transport on the TV series Space 1999. And as a child watching that show, I think I was 7 when it first came on in 75. And I was immediately taken by it. It was this moon base with an international crew with a lot of diversity in it. They were all scientists and intelligent and reasoning people. They were thrust into a really extreme, albeit crazy situation, but it was getting to see them follow this and go on this journey. And this spacecraft that they used, as opposed to having a transport or something like that, every week they had this ship, the Eagle. Now, the thing that was so cool about the Eagle was if you looked at it, it had aspects that were specifically related to some of the NASA hardware. So you saw the same kind of reaction control thrusters that were on like the command and service module or the lunar module, right? And they mm-hmm. looked exactly the same. It's like, okay, so for me as a kid who was aware of the Apollo program, and then you see this TV show that takes place 25 years in the future, you think, man, that's the kind of hardware we could be flying around in. That's my future, right? So like Star mm-hmm. Trek I was well aware that Star Trek was 300 years in the future, right? And I was watching those reruns. And honestly, I was pretty bummed because I wanted to see Earth in that show. I wanted to see Earth in Star Trek. I wanted to go like, what's Earth like? What's it?
Yes, I agree.
Really? Yeah.
And it's always fun. I just want to see, how does everybody live? What's like the day-to-day on Earth?
What's that
in the future?
We got a tiny bit Next Generation.
Every once in a while, but
no,
and then
that wasn't much. Yeah,
Next
that's
Gen
true.
Did get you there, right? Next
tiny
Gen
bit.
got us
Yep.
there some. Deep Space Nine got us there some. But I think that as a small child watching Star Trek, the original series, it was like, but Earth, And so Space 1999 being set in my lifetime, potentially, that was much more intriguing to me in a way. And so there's this spaceship. Now what's happened is, I think I first got my hands on one of those in, there was Mattel had one of their best-selling toys in 1976 was a 3-foot version of that eagle. And kids, they sold thousands and thousands of these things. Kids all around the world they got them for Christmas. I was lucky. I actually got 2 that year. It happened by accident. It was so cool. And then they subsequently had die-cast metal versions of them and other things, right? And then they had model kits. And what I've discovered is that there is a rabid fandom specifically around the spaceship. And it's not just about Space 1999. There are people who like this ship who don't even like Space 1999. And if you look at like top 10 lists of like greatest sci-fi spaceships of all time, the Eagle's almost always in the top 3. It's right there with the Enterprise and the Millennium Falcon. Those are usually the top 3. Okay. So for me, so as I started looking into this, and suddenly I discovered there's like millions of people that are into it. And I'm like, wow, okay. So there's even like a guy in Denmark who has constructed a 25-foot version of it this year.
Oh
He's
my
building
gosh.
it right now in his yard. Okay. And it's directly perfectly accurate. Like he's built this huge version of it. It's quarter scale. And then there's another guy I know who's in Indiana. He pulled together a whole fan page on Facebook, and it's got tens of thousands of followers. And they reissued model kits, got new model kits made, and they've sold 50,000 model kits in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Right. And they're selling more and more. It's not going down. So my point was, as a fan of this and a guy who collects them, you can see one right behind me that I've got. I have more of them. I was like, why do I like this thing so much? And I started realizing you like it because you never got your future. The future never happened.
But you know the other thing about it? It looked like it could work.
Yeah, that's
with the rear propulsion system, as you said, with the thrusters, the landing gear, the storage section in the middle, and the command module or whatever up front. This looked like something that could be built.
It felt like the descendant of the lunar module. That's what it felt like, right? It felt like if we're flying lunar modules, LEMs right now, we're going to be flying Eagles in 25 years, right? That's what it felt like. And so my point is, though, like, I really believe the Eagle has come to epitomize this lost dream in a lot of ways for many people. And I know for me, I think that this idea of we stopped walking on the moon in December of 1972, we haven't been back. Now we're talking about going back. We're working on it.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. And
we have somebody here who is working on it right here. Adina's team.
That's awesome. I'm a huge fan, especially of the the public initiatives around this. I'm really, really excited by what the government's up to, and I can talk about that more later. But I think it's really, really exciting. And so my point is, I kind of see Apollo at one end and Artemis at the other, and I see the Eagle in the middle. I see the Eagle is kind of keeping the dream alive for so many people. And it's funny because I don't think people even know it. And when I've asked like the folks I'm interviewing, it's like a light bulb goes off and they're like, oh my gosh, I was a child. That's why I love this so much. I wanted to grow up and fly it.
Now, we did interview Jamie Anderson earlier this year, and it was a joy to chat with him about his dad and all the different series and so on. How is Jamie's Anderson Entertainment? Is that involved in the production of this, or how did you work out the approval rights of all that?
So I've got approval from ITV. Actually, Anderson Entertainment actually has a license from ITV to do Space 1999 products. So we may do some tie-in stuff with them via sub-license at some point, but we've worked directly with ITV, the network, who owns 1999. And like, for example, if you guys saw the trailer that I did, I not only did I get permission, I licensed clips, I paid for the clips, I have a relationship with them. They're completely aware of the project. As a matter of fact, they've even promoted the project. They like it that much. Anderson Entertainment has promoted the project for me. Jamie Anderson's going to be in the documentary, as is also his associate, Chris Thompson, who did the recent Moonbase Alpha technical manual, which is absolutely stunning piece of work. So I'm, I've been embracing these people and bringing them in and making them part of it. I think it's really important. The documentary currently I'm doing an interview on December 5th with Charles Duke, who was the the lunar module pilot for Apollo 16 and one of the 3 remaining moonwalkers of the 12 men who walked on the moon. I'm interviewing him at the Kennedy Space Center, and they're pulling out all the stops for us for that. We're going to be doing
that. Is wonderful.
It's awesome. I've already shot with Kevin Anderson, who's a noted author who's written a bunch of the Dune books and wrote Star Wars, X-Files. Kevin's a good friend of mine. He's co-author of Persephone novel with me. We've done, I've been to several events where there were collectors there who have, enormous 8-foot eagles and dozens, if not hundreds of these things of collections. I was in Calgary. They brought eagles, people from all around the world. So you're going to see all this stuff in the documentary. And there are many women who are fans of this too, who collect them. It's pretty crazy, so, and then the greatest thing of it is that I'm actually rebuilding it. We just started this week at Pinewood Studios. We're building a new replica of the interior of the ship, and I'm bringing Nick Tate and some of the other actors from the original. That's
amazing.
To actually sit in it, and I'm going to hang out with them in it, and they'll be the first time they've been in this thing for 50 years. So it's pretty cool.
Cool. So when you get this idea to do a documentary, if you can even answer this question, because I'm assuming there's so many things that go into it, where do you start? Because I love the idea of making a documentary, but I feel like, okay, that's a huge thing you got to do.
Well, I think the number one thing, and honestly, it's an evolving target, is what's my core human story, right? What's the human story at the core of this? Because one of the things that I've had to say sometimes to some of the fans, Adina, I don't know if you've ever heard this term, but I know a couple guys at NASA who use this term. They call people rivet counters, and the rivet counters are the people who know all the technical details of everything down to So they would watch an episode of Next Generation. If there's an inconsistency between one episode and the next, they're complaining about it, right? They're like, well, the transporter doesn't work like that, and that other episode it did this and that, right? They have no idea how hard it is to tell those stories or make that stuff happen, right? But one of the things that's happened is I've had some of the fans who are really, really hardcore, and there are people who are obsessive about literally the details of this spaceship from 50 years ago. They've got the schematics and the plans and all this stuff. And these people will say to me, why are you trying to tell all these stories about people? Why don't you just tell, how did they make it? How did they do the visual effects of it? What are the details of it? And I'm like, well, because there's probably only about 400 people on Earth who'd want to watch that. You know what I mean, right?
We would, I think.
Definitely watch that.
Probably watch it, right? But I recognize. But how can at the end of the day, my budget for this thing's over $1 million. How do I justify $1 million to make a documentary that is going to appeal to 400 people? It's not going to work. I need to make something that's going to appeal to millions of people, and that's going to be a story. So what I'm hoping is, so to answer your question, Christian, I'm trying to create something that's going to, my first thing is, what's a human story here that could be both surprising and exciting and intriguing and keep people's attention, right? While also serving those 400 people too. That makes sense. That's,
exactly.
That's the hard, balance that I'm going through with this is doing that. So once I kind of hit a story, which is, to me, it's about people's obsession with this, and I think it's surprising. I think this is going to be a surprising story. Like, wait a minute, what? There was this show 50 years ago and people still talk about it. That's interesting in and of itself. Then number two, there's a spaceship on that show and people still buy toys of that and miniatures of it and all this stuff and do art of it and animations of it and blah, 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 blah. Right. That's what I'm doing.
I can tell you, I got a email from Anderson Entertainment talking about selling the Eagle at $199 each in various different shapes of the medical one, the usual one. Well, if people weren't excited about it, they wouldn't even put this up for sale. And so
that just happened like a week ago or something.
Yeah.
So no, I'm telling you, this is something that's got interest. I was just talking to a buddy of mine who's an aerospace engineer. He's like, man, did you know I became an aerospace engineer because of that show and that spaceship? He said, I watched as a kid. That's what made me want to do it, So I think there's a story here that's really, really interesting. I'm super excited to tell it. But at the end of the day, it's not about the Eagle. It's about the fact that there was the number one thing I want people to come away from is what impact did that time period have on a certain, echelon of youth, right? This group of young people. No one talks about that. What was it like to be 5 through 15 years old during the Apollo program? And if you were into it, what did it mean to you? Right? Yes, exactly.
I tell you, to me, it meant a lot because I built a model of the LEM and it sat on the TV while we were watching the lunar landing.
Yep.
While the whole thing was going on. But what we didn't know, the reality was just how dangerous it was.
Yes.
How unbelievably successful they were, and how they, if something had happened, if Neil Armstrong didn't maneuver the LEM correctly and land it as he did, and it crashed into the Earth, or excuse me, into the moon.
Yeah.
What it would have done to the whole moon program. It would have come to an end. It's as difficult as it was when Challenger exploded. It was as difficult as it was when Columbia went up and didn't make it home. These are things that we're never prepared for.
Well,
and
the public might not be prepared for, but the folks who work on these and the astronauts themselves, they do a lot of. They know that this is a real possibility. It is very dangerous work that they're doing. This is a real possibility. So there's different levels of preparedness when you say that we're, I feel like there's a lot of preparation and preparedness that goes into. Now, of course, you never want or hope, but there is a lot of preparedness. I'm sorry, I just had to.
I appreciate. Yeah,
but I think the public doesn't know that, right?
No, that's right.
And a big part of, I was
going to say the public doesn't know that one of the reasons why today these things are so expensive is because, NASA is very risk adverse. They care deeply about the health of the astronauts and the safety, health and safety of the astronauts and the people involved. And so what that means for us contractors and what we have to go through to demonstrate that what we're building is safe, it's expensive. That's what makes this stuff also very expensive. People I don't think really understand and appreciate.
Absolutely. And there's also, I think there's just the political angle too, of just, if you started sending people up and they keep dying, you already have a public that doesn't understand the benefits of this or what they're doing. You're going to lose your money.
Yeah.
You're going to lose your money.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, I hope I answered your question, Christian.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, because like learning about documentaries, it's like always, okay, you're going to talk about this specific topic, but what's the story? What does it?
Right.
What's the greater meaning of it? So that's very helpful.
I'm going to say straight up, there are going to be people who are those hardcore Eagle guys who are going to be like, man, I just wanted to see something about the Eagle. Why am I seeing this stuff about this guy's life or these people's lives? Because to me, that's what's going to make this actually interesting to a broader audience. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's back to what Steve was talking about with the original Star Trek, right? It's about the people. It's about humanity.
Exactly.
Right. And so I'm just using this technological toy to be something that's a jump off point to talk about a human thing, and even when I talk about my interest in the space program, at the end of the day, it's not about the space program. It's about the fact that I saw that as being a key element in the evolution and development and potential of our species. That's what the space program epitomizes for me, if that makes sense, That's a big part of what this is all about. It's like humans reaching their potential, humans pushing the boundaries, becoming better. finding ways to evolve and to also to look back on our own planet and understand how fragile and how important it is. So all that's a big part of what all that's about. So that's what this documentary is going to do.
And
I hope too.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'll jump in. I see, like, as envisioning from, of course, way outside of it, but wouldn't it be cool also if this project really brings new fans and new, not just to the Space 19, Eagle, all that stuff, but to sci-fi in general, to understand what sci-fi is about and about the human story aspect of it, because that, for me, honestly, occasionally I've been poked fun at by my buddies about why I like Star Trek so much more than Star Wars. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars. I'll watch it anytime that someone wants to watch it. I'm there, okay? But they see Star Trek as just this kind of cleaner, slicker version of an outer space story. And I'm like, you have no idea. When I try to explain the depthness of it and the human stories they're actually trying to tell and how deep it is, I get laughed out of the room sometimes because, first of all, they'd rather see all the shoot 'em up, and which is fine. It's fun, but to tell the real human stories is so important. And it's one reason why I like science fiction. We can go there. We can get real deep.
We don't know what they're missing.
I agree. Thank you, Adina.
Actually agree. And the one disappointment I have with science fiction to some degree, which I know makes me different than many people, is like, I wish more of it. So look, I mean, we live literally in a science fiction world, right? Just literally, like if you go back in time at some point, almost everything we do at some point was some scientific invention, development, some, an idea, right? What we're doing literally right now, right? Is sci-fi to somebody at some point in the past, right? Those headphones you gentlemen are wearing, right?
Right.
Microphones, right? It was all this.
This is what I tell people all the time.
I was watching a Pixar documentary and I'm like, Pixar seems like science fiction. I know that it's real. I know that people can animate movies, but I'm like, this is all unbelievable to me. In that respect.
But then this is what I tell people all the time. If you had told someone 100 years ago that we would be sitting here, we're on various parts of the planet, we're having this real time, face to face, that would have been completely inconceivable. It was inconceivable for most of human history.
Now, the sad part, and you guys don't have to agree with me on this, but here's the thing. I think along with what you just said, Adina, is that when a lot of times when people would talk about those ideas, like, in the future they could do this, they would imagine that they would take the next step and they'd say, so because they do that, they're like more enlightened. they're smarter.
That's funny.
They're much better people because they can do that, right? And that's the part that I think is somehow missing for us, is that piece, right? And that's what I want to try. I want to figure it out desperately, because I feel like the world, if we don't figure this out, we have a lot of challenges coming up, and if we don't figure this out, the challenges could outpace us the way it's going. It's like,
That's the magic of when we talk about the Star Trek future, is we're not always talking about the technology or the fact that they're exploring space. We are talking about just how they seem to have been, it's a post-scarcity society. People seem to generally have it together in a way that we clearly do not yet.
I mean, you like a Barclay is Lieutenant Barclay is an anomaly.
I love him.
You know what I mean? Right? He's an
Lieutenant Broccoli.
You know what I mean? He's an anomaly. It's like there's one of the things that I've watched, you see science fiction doing. If you go back, there was this wonderful thing that used to be in science fiction where you would take a group of people who were literally what it took to be an astronaut, to be an engineer. You had to be the best. You actually had to have it together. You couldn't be like, I'm not saying that there wasn't somebody who might have had a side alcohol problem or marital issues. Or
right. Yeah.
Look at sci-fi stuff now. That's front. That's who these people are, right? So it's like, he's an alcoholic with tremendous sex addiction issues, but he's got to lead this mission. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like I don't get it, and it's like I love the fact that if you go back and you look at these people had it together, and then you took people who had it together and you gave them situations that challenge their humanity or challenge their skill set. That's what it was, right? Like when I look back at even shows like Battlestar Galactica back in the 70s, that trio of those pilots, you know, Apollo, he had it together. Starbuck, yeah, he was a womanizer or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, he had it, you know what I mean? These guys had it together. I feel like we need that again, like to create these like cool people who are role models who like have it together. And then you obviously throw things at them. You make it difficult. You give them challenges because that's part of life. But I think we've got this misnomer that, you know, that like with the example, you remember the female astronaut who like back, I don't know, whenever it was, who like,
oh yeah, she was. Yep,
she was like
I know what you're talking about.
She wore the diaper and drove halfway across. You know, and so that is such an anomaly. That is such an anomaly. There's just these people. That's not who they are. You know, typically. You know? So I just feel like it's actually a lack of imagination. It's funny. People say, what's more imaginative? I actually think it's a lack of imagination. I think, and I think that also when you look at, I think that for everyday people, a lot of everyday people are turned off by aliens in these shows.
Yeah.
You know, I think with that, like I've just done it. I've watched sci-fi through the eyes of people who don't like it. It's something I do a lot. And I try to see it through their eyes, and so like watch Star Trek. Like if Star Trek was all people, like we're all on a ship and it's all humans, and they're wearing these uniforms or whatever. People might go, "What's that uniform? Why are they wearing that?" It's like, well, it's this thing called Starfleet. Okay, got it. But then it's like, well, who's that blue guy? You know, right? Or like, why is that person's forehead like that? You know what I mean, right? It's, right. And I think that becomes a leap that a lot of everyday people can't get past. You know, and part of why sci-fi is being nerdy or this thing that's for like a fringe group, where I think it could be brought more into the mainstream if we just told more stories about just people, you know, just like the people. I think that's one of the strengths of the show, The Expanse. I think that was really, you know, they obviously had this one element that was kind of alien, the proto-molecule, but aside from that, it was just people. You know, I think, you know what I mean? I think that was one of the edicts of the reboot of Battlestar Galactica. It was like, we're not going to bring any aliens into this thing. And I think that's part of why it was so acclaimed and had so many people that liked it, you know, so. Yeah. So anyway, that's just some of the thoughts I have. I guess the kind of science fiction, the kind of documentaries, the kind of work I'm doing, it's very important to me that this reaches a mass audience that typically doesn't always access science fiction, while still bringing along all the fans who love science fiction, because I'm one of them.
Yeah. So can I ask you a little bit about your company?
Sure.
Future Dude.
Yes, Future Dude. You promised to tell us the name.
How did you come up with a name? What is the mission statement, if you want to say, about the company? What are you wanting to do with it? I mean, because and we did talk to one time a guy out here on the West Coast who has his own production house. We learned about why he started his business and so on. So you're a businessman. You've got a company. You've got employees. Tell us a little bit about it, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I haven't been on anyone else's payroll since like 1991. You know, I started my first business way back then. And I started out originally doing, I knew I wanted to get into feature films, but I started out doing more music videos and corporate type stuff. And I'm based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And part of why I came here after college, I wanted to focus on, I'm also a musician and everything. So I was interested in working with the Minneapolis sound thing that was going on at the time, Prince and a lot of the stuff that was going on. It was a big deal. And not only did you have what was happening with Prince, and then he just built Paisley Park studio, and but there were movies being made here. The Coen brothers are from here. There was a lot happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I think in a lot of ways, if the state had gotten more involved and passed like good tax credits, I don't know if you guys are aware, but like in what is it in Vancouver,
Georgia?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It's Georgia now, right? But for a long time, it's like Vancouver and Toronto, because like in Canada, they started having these just amazing tax credits, right? Minnesota was heading in that direction, actually. So anyway, I based my company here. My plan was to get things up and running and to do this. And I started writing screenplays on the side. I started doing, I was doing documentaries. I worked with Delta Airlines. I got to direct a big series of spots with Chuck Yeager, which was very interesting. He was
that must have been exciting to have met that gentleman.
Really interesting because I was a huge fan of The Right Stuff. I'd read the book. I liked the movie. So getting a chance to work, and so I'm directing Chuck Yeager, right? That thing. It was really interesting experience because I walk on the stage and I walk out. It's on the tarmac at the airport. We're going to shoot this scene. We have all these 747s lined up, and all the pilots are there. And the pilots they introduced me as this is the director. And all the pilots shook my hand. They're super excited. And then Chuck Yeager looks at me, looks me up and down, and walks away. And and it turned out that he was this really, really big racist. He was a big racist.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, he did not.
I did not know.
Yeah, he didn't like the idea of a black director. That wasn't his thing. But it was interesting because as the day went on, I would never back down. I just wouldn't back down, and I kept pushing him, and I kept directing him. And by the time the day was over, he was talking to me, and we were hanging out. He gave me an autograph. We'd sit, and stuff. And I just realized it was just one of these, it's one of these things, like, especially when I look at what's going on nowadays and the level of sensitivity so many people have, they would have lost their minds back that they couldn't have handled it. And like, I just stood my ground. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I didn't do anything wrong by being me.
Right.
He respected the man, not the color of the man. He respected who you were.
I think that might have changed, pushed him a little bit. Which was interesting. So, but that was a notable experience early in my career. Then I got pulled into educational stuff, and I kept working with area schools, and I ended up teaching with the School of Management here about entrepreneurship at the University of Minnesota. I started working with local schools and doing some science outreach stuff, and people were like, this is really cool. You should keep doing this. So I ended up creating a nonprofit 501c3 called Project Universe that was about bringing space and astronomy and sciences to everyday kids, everyday people. And I had a project that I wanted to show NASA, and I went and met with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, some people there, and they were like, this is really cool. Do you want to work for us? So that became the beginning. And my company became a contractor with JPL.
Wow.
And NASA.
Cool.
Worked with them for about 10 years and ended up having Buzz Aldrin as a client, and all kinds of stuff happened during that time. That said, I was always still, my eye was still on the idea of making films and doing sci-fi stuff. And so I got to about 2010, and I decided I was going to create a company that pulled together my interest in science and education with my filmmaking background and my entrepreneurship. And so that's what this company is. And so the company's actual official name is Morris Futureworks. But I was going around, I was meeting all these cool people. Some of the actors, like I was good friends with Nichelle Nichols, for example. And I would hang out with these people from NASA, or I was at the SETI Institute with Seth Shostak and all these people, right? And I kept meeting all these cool people. And I was like, I should do a blog about all this stuff that's happening. So I was trying to find up a cool name for the blog. And I was playing around with these different, and I was thinking about my love of Carl Sagan. And then I was thinking about, like, who's really popularizing science right now? And I thought about Bill Nye the Science Guy. And I was thinking about how that kind of brings it down. It's folksy, it's everyday people. So I came up with this word combination of future dude. And I was like, that's because I was like, you aren't just into space, you're like into,
cool
space,
stuff,
oceanography and engineering and all these things, but it's really about the future, and it's really about the human future. So how about future dude? So I created this blog, and within, I don't know, 3 months, I had like 50,000 hits on the blog.
Wow.
It was really cool. And then I even went to, the year later, I went to Washington, D.C. to present this graphic novel I created about a mission to the planet Venus. And I'm there, and I'm walking through this big symposium, and this guy yells, "Hey, it's that future dude guy." I was like, what? It was actually a little scary. But I was realizing I was starting to get some inroads, and people were noticing it. And so in 2013, I decided to rename the company around the blog. And so that's when it became Future Dude Entertainment. And it's people like it. It's got a kind of I'm just trying to bring it down to earth. I want it to not take itself too seriously, right? And make it so that people feel like it's accessible. And then once I get them in, then I'm going to hit them with the with the stuff I've been telling you guys about.
What you really want to do, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the name of that. So since 2013, we've I have a really great group of investors working with me, and we've developed several projects. We've done something called Parallel Man, which is about parallel universes, and I did a graphic novel of that, and we did an animated short which starred John Cho and the late Lance Reddick and Ming-Na Wen. And then simultaneously, I did an underwater adventure called Oceanus, which is about an underwater city in the Pacific and a disaster that happens, a global disaster, and which isolates the underwater city. And I did both of those, and then so then I've done, I don't know, several comic book series. These films, I've been developing feature films, that sort of thing, and this documentary. So it's been an interesting journey. We've been really close to launching our big features several times, but stuff has just gotten in the way. And it's just, but I've had enough positive feedback on the work that I'm doing. Like even these shorts that I did a few years back, we're just getting ready to get major distribution for them. They're going to actually be on Roku and Freevee and Tubi soon.
Nice.
These are things I made years ago. People still are like, these are awesome. So what I'm hoping is I'll finally get some traction and be able to turn them into something huge. And I've got so much stuff I could show you guys. I mean, like we've spent millions of dollars developing these IPs. We're just ready to go. We just have to, get the right track, and it'll. So I think that this documentary will be the thing that kind of opens the floodgates, and it's our coming out party in a way.
So do you sleep between 3 and 4 a.m. and that's about it, or what?
It's funny to say that. Sleep has always been a challenge.
It seems like your mind is always going for I'm working on and what's the next thing I want to do.
Yeah, it is. And one of the things that's been, honestly, it's been a bit disheartening because I get pretty far in some of this stuff, and I have it so well realized. It's just I think first off, science fiction is really difficult to do because the budgets aren't small. Christian, you were asking movies, right? One of the hard parts with sci-fi, it's like it's different. I always joke that like if I wanted to make a boxing movie, I could knock that out in a week because I could just go find a local gym and a local place that has a box. You know what I mean? And actors, I could make.
Yeah.
Welcome to Rocky.
Right. I could make
exactly how they made it.
Exactly. I could make Rocky. I could make a romance story easily. But when it comes to doing something like science fiction, especially something like a film like a Persephone or Oceanus, where we're having to make, costumes and sets and props, and you're building the future. It doesn't just hit the store. You got to build it from scratch. And so that's been sometimes prohibitive, right? Because and especially I try to create stuff that's really, really good and memorable and different. And so, and the budgets that I'm looking for are not crazy. I think, most of my films will, I can make them for under $50 million, under $25 million, that sort of thing. It's not about having 100 million, 200 million. It's more about having, Hollywood has become really reticent. Everything is so star driven, and it's like it's in the movie. Like I have this film right now, and I've attached actors like Ming-Na Wen and Isai Morales, and I'll pitch it around Hollywood, and they're like, "Yeah, it's just not; those aren't big enough names." It's crazy. It's crazy, man. It's like
that's ridiculous.
But even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
I know, and they won't even read the script. Yeah. They literally won't even read the script. Like they'll just go, "Who's in it?" And I had big name producers attached. And those big name producers will go out and pitch my projects, and they go, well, okay, who's attached to it? And so that's part of why you're seeing all these things on cable that have the same actors in them over and over and over again, because they're very reticent to take risks. And they also are reticent to take risks on new IP. That's another thing. Something like this film recently, The Creator, that was really hard to get made.
Which movie was this?
The Creator. It was
The Creator, yeah. How long did that last in the theater?
Yeah, and it, I don't think it even crossed 100 million, but it was close. I think it was around, the last time I looked, around 95 million, but it was made for 80 million. But then you have these movies like these Marvel films that are being made. That movie, The Marvels, was just made for $250 million budget, or like the Indiana Jones film, over $300 million for the budget of that film. Like it's kind of obscene, when you think about it. Like this is the gross domestic product of entire countries. One movie,
Now, do you run into a problem where you pitch an idea and you say this is a self-contained? Does the studio Like, do you find studios are like, well, if you're making it a series, we're more likely to be interested?
No, here, I'll tell you straight up. It's who's in it? Does it have the familiar tropes?
Mm-hmm.
Is it based on IP that already exists? So in other words, was this a best-selling novel? Was this a very successful graphic novel? Was this something that people have heard of already? That's first.
Wow.
That's first, right?
Okay.
And then if you don't have that, then it's like, okay, you're telling me you don't have any of those things. So is Brad Pitt attached? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like, you know what I mean? So, and then it's actually literally getting to a place where even like, if you're Brad Pitt now, it's not that easy. Just because you're Brad Pitt, you can't just go and get things made like you could have 10 years ago.
Unless you have your own production company like Brad Pitt has, another like that, then you can kind of force the issue. You can force it, and maybe you're going to get the financing because you are Brad Pitt or whatever, and you can do these things. But
I think that some of the stuff is put up your own money is one of the deals. But here's where I am. It's like I've actually found that there's a lot more openness to my approach to science fiction in Europe, for example. Like I'm over there pitching like in England and stuff, like people are like, this is awesome. They, like I have, potential financiers. Like I'm literally Persephone right now. I have a financier out of Italy and the UK who's very interested in producing it. So, and then I was just over in Europe back in February, and I went to toured studios in Munich and in Warsaw, and these people are like, this is fantastic. Let's get this made, But if I go pitching it in Hollywood, the first question is, who's in it?
Yeah.
It's crazy, guys. I'm unbelievable. Really up. It is very, very frustrating, so that's been a big part of the challenge for this. So I don't want to, Christian, I want to, dissuade you from going down the path of being a filmmaker and everything. But I would say this, if you get the opportunity to actually take something and make it all the way, make it all the way. Don't way to make, even if you made something for $100,000 and made the whole thing and it's a completed project, that's going to mean a lot more than being out there pitching ideas, because it's not because you have a good idea that something gets greenlit right now. It's because you know somebody, because of relationships.
Yeah.
It's all relationships. Yeah. That's what's greenlighting projects. So, yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Good to know.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot to think about.
Yeah. So
we're gonna redo the phrase. The new phrase is, comedy is hard, making films is even harder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's definitely not easy. And trying to do this thing of sort of realistic hard sci-fi and stuff like that, it's just it's not something that people even understand enough to get their brains around it quickly.
And the interesting thing is, we're always, you look at the Marvel films and, okay, this was big. Now it's got to be bigger. Now it's going to be even bigger and bigger. And the threat's got to be gianter. And so the special effects get more expensive and the production and the whole thing. And if it flops, then wow.
Well, bear in mind that each film usually has the print and advertising, the marketing budget is oftentimes 2 to 3 times the actual budget of the film itself, right? So when you had Indiana Jones that was made for $300 million, that means that they had to make almost $1 billion to just break even.
Unbelievable.
$1 billion? I mean, it's like that, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But the problem is there's films that they're making that billion deal. You look at the latest Avatar film. It made almost $3 billion.
Oh, it made that much. Wow.
Yes. It's crazy.
The number of films that do that is not many.
Right.
It's not.
And it seems like now it's even harder for films to like, even with we were talking about the Marvels. It's like MCU is struggling. They're really struggling with getting the numbers.
Yeah, no question.
I think.
No question.
Well, you get burnout. It becomes like,
I think the audience is getting tired of seeing the same old stuff. There was a big disappointment with the Mission Impossible movie that just came out. It didn't do as well as they thought it would. I just think it's like, I don't think people know what they want, but I think they know they want deep down, they want something else. They want something different.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Because it becomes formulaic, and that becomes, what do they say on the radio? They said, if you've seen the Marvels, you're just seeing a movie that's been made 32 times.
Right.
Because it's the same formula.
The same formula. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm going to stick to my guns and I'm not giving up on it because I do believe that with what I make, the quality of what I make, I have enough people out there who are fans of it, who are telling me this is awesome, keep going. So I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make these films, get them done. So
Go for it, man.
Is
Go for
the
it.
Eagle landed? When the Eagle is landed, when is that going to be available? And how's it going to be available? Is it going to be theater or direct TV or what?
I'm in discussions with a chance to get it into 12,000 theaters in North America, which is really great. I mean, I've got a really good, and I'm partnering with a company called 0.0 out of New York. They did Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain and other really cool shows and stuff. So they're like top-notch people. So they're going to be leading the sales effort. So we're targeting when this is done, and I'm shooting it at motion picture quality. So it's going to be ready to be in a theater. It's going to have visual effects in it. It's got all kinds of quality stuff. My idea is that this could probably end up on Apple, Netflix, or Amazon in the end.
Oh, that'd be great.
So that's the plan.
Nice.
That will probably debut in 2025.
Okay, that's going to ask when do you think it's going to come out?
We're planning to have it in the can, ready to go to debut at TIFF, the Toronto Film Festival.
Oh, yes.
Well, Christian can
go
to see that. That's right, because that's where Christian's neighborhood is.
Yeah. So that the TIFF thing will be in September of 24. That would be the.
Oh, okay.
So that's planning for that to be the premiere of the documentary.
Gotcha.
So,
That's great.
We'll make sure too. We'll have links to your webpage and all that stuff, so people can get connected and follow all your stuff, sir, and support it however they can in our podcast notes. So make sure you guys, as you're listening to this, after you listen to it, click those links and check it out. You will not be disappointed.
No, it's impressive.
I really do. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share with us, Jeffrey? I mean, we have a tendency we could keep talking about this for hours. And I
know
we've gone to two-parters because we get into such discussions with such interesting people, because you're the guy that makes it. You want to do this. I mean, we have over here, we have two authors, who have written and published their own books, especially Adina, because she wanted to do it, to quote Frank Sinatra, my way. I'm sorry for singing, Brian.
Frank Sinatra?
All right. Wake up, mouth. Anyway, but that was Adina's plan. She wanted to do it her way.
Yeah.
And you want to do it your way. And I think that stands out in the quality of what you want to get done and how you want it done and how you want it presented. Yeah. And is there anything else you want to share with us, with the listening audience, as they say?
No, I just, I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. I've done some research into you guys and your shows. I think it's really, really great that you were able to connect with your audience and share the stories. And you guys all have some real passion for this. And I think it's very important and appreciated. So I wanted to say that.
Thank you, sir.
It's a real honor to be here and be part of this. I want to be hopeful that we can figure out these big problems in front of us. It's interesting. I think, Adina, you said something earlier that struck me. It's like this, Star Trek, the Star Trek future. And I feel like we're at a crossroads. I literally feel like we're at a crossroads right now. And it's sad because it's really beyond politics. This has to do with the choice we want to make as a species. But are we going to go for Mad Max? Or are we going to go for Star Trek?
Right.
We're at that crossroads. We're at the junction. Are we going Mad Max or are we going Star Trek? And my dream and my goal right now is to figure out how can we get us more on the path to that Star Trek future than the Mad Max future, because it feels like we're plunging headlong toward a Mad Max future right now. And we have accomplished so much as a species to get this far, and it just would be very sad to see us throw that away, So right on. All I have,
Your point is well taken, and it's true. We live in a global world now. It's not little fiefdoms and little so on. We live in a global world, and we have to rely upon each other. And we're seeing that countries that were adversaries are now friends, and we have to bring this planet together. And again, that was the hopeful dream of Star Trek, because you saw one of the first times a crew made up of various nationalities.
Absolutely.
And skin tones and different belief systems and so on, but they were all with a certain simple process or mission, which is to, strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilization. Yeah. And that's what we want to do. We want to have a hopeful future. And I think that's what you're working on yourself.
I think the reason why I'm saying this is because you guys do reach the Star Trek community, and I think it's the idea that we have. I feel like we've got to start figuring out how to mobilize more of us to figure out how to get back on track to something more positive here. We have to. We're stuck in all these silos and arguing, and it's really interesting watching what social media has kind of done. Look, there's a great side of social media. It's part of why we're here. Right. Right? Why I know you guys, right? Part of why so many amazing people. I wouldn't know. I've been working on projects with Michael Okuda. I wouldn't know him if it weren't for social media. That's how we met. And I go on and on and on about all these amazing affiliations I've made because of social media. That's the upside. But on the downside, it's like it's also it's created a society where people, it seems like they can't communicate as well. They can't debate. They can't share different ideas. We're stuck in these silos, and the silos are getting more and more polarized, and it's very, very disturbing to see. So like I said, I think part of why I wanted to say this at the end is just simply because I think that Star Trek fans have a unique perspective, and I think they have a sense of hope and a sense of the future that maybe some of these other fandoms don't have. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Definitely.
And that's where we go back to what I started off. We're dreamers, and we're dreaming of a better world and a better society. And if we can achieve it and we can get it, we will look back. We're only on this planet for a very short period of time. And we watch Star Trek, and that's set 300 years in the future. And we're just worried about the next 30 years, let alone to get to that point. So, let's let the dreamers keep us hopeful for a better future and a better society. And thank you, Jeffrey, for doing what you can to improve that through your artwork.
Thank you. I appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much.
And there you have it. That's, as I said, what makes a dreamer a dreamer. I hope you've enjoyed our interview with Jeffrey Morris, that you will support him in his current and future endeavors. And if you wish to, well, it's a little late now to contribute to his Kickstarter program, but he did tell me he did 700 times his original expected amount. That means that there are people who truly believe in his project and what he wants to do and what he wants to accomplish. And I think that's the greatest compliment you can get, to have people help you out one way or another. So thank you again for listening to this and all other podcasts. And if you are gentle listeners that we get together and record these programs, we hope you have been entertained and enlightened as well. This is our 5th season. In it, we hope to have many more interesting actors and content creators to interview, or more of our usual ramblings of our favorite TV series, Star Trek. Sorry. And look forward to...
What'd you say? I have no idea. It sounded like you were coughing.
Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh, yeah. Did I? I thought I said Star Trek Enterprise. Wait a minute here. Let's not get into it. Let's start that again.
Let the man finish his closing.
We look forward to more interesting content available on Trek Geek's intergalactic website, now available in the Delta Quadrant. Try assimilating this broadcast, Borg. We dare you. And as always, I leave you with this parting words. Look to the sky, live long and prosper. Thank you.